Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for today's edition of Arkansas Alive. It's a great blessing to have you with me every day. This is the day the Lord hath made. We're going to rejoice and be glad in it. All this week, we've been teaching on how to live life skillfully. We'll continue with that today, so stay tuned. Arkansas Alive starts right now. You know, I've made reference many times to the family being the crucible of God's instruction. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 1, and I want to read this again, because if you're gonna live life skillfully, and I realize everybody doesn't have a family like I had to draw from. I realize that, but there are substitutes. The body of Christ should be your first clue. Where do you get a substitute family? In your church company, in your church, the body of Christ, there should be mentors. There should be fathers of the faith. There should be mothers of the faith. I know Jeannie, all through our pastorate of 35 years, Jeannie always taught the women. She taught them how to be skillful women, how to be correct according to the Bible in their position as a wife, as a mother, as raising children. And the Lord told her to prune, polish, and perfect the women. Teach them how to be pruned, polished, and perfected. She brought in guest speakers that would teach them and minister to them and mentor them. Jeannie did a lot of counseling and helped women learn to be godly women. So there should be people in your congregation, in your church, that can act as mentors. The pastor, of course, is always a mentor, whether he likes it or not. And then the pastor's wife and family. And I know we learned that too. Our son, he has a different story sometimes, because it was challenging to him too. People always expected him to be perfect, and he wasn't. And he, acknowledged that and tried to let people know. But he was a good son. He grew up and making A's and B's in school. He was never disobedient, never rebelled, he never did drugs, never smoked, drank, whatever. He did a great service too. He was a youth minister, he was a children's pastor. So everybody has to be a mentor in some way. In fact, Jeannie and I were talking the other day, we were going through some of our record albums, and he wrote a song called "Your Life is the Only Bible That Some People Will Ever Read." And I wish I had a copy of it to play for you, but that was a good song for kids to learn and for people to learn. Your life is the only Bible that some people will ever read. So you're admonished to be a good witness. But the family was the crucible for God's wisdom, to learn to be skillful, how to live your life skillfully. Look at Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and forsake not the law of your mother. Now, I've used this example many times. You have to hear the instruction of your father. You remember when Norman Lear passed away? He was a producer out in Hollywood, and they gave him so much credit for so many of these sitcoms that he had written and directed and so forth. And I don't think I ever saw any of his sitcoms, but I recognized the names and the characters. But all of his sitcoms destroyed the family. All of his sitcoms made light of the family, made fools of the fathers, and surrogates of the mothers. It seemed, and this was back in the 60s, I guess, it seems he delighted in poking fun of and making fun of the family. Now, he said in an interview that I saw, he said that he was just mirroring what the family was like. But if you go back another generation to the 50s, they had Father Knows Best. Of course, in the 50s, television just came on the scene. I didn't see a television set till, I think it was the early 50s. The TV stations did not have a lot of material. I mean, they didn't have programs to run. They had to create them. And television here in Arkansas only came on at 6 o'clock in the morning and went off at 6 o'clock at night. That was the day of broadcasting. It started with prayer every morning. I'm telling you the truth. If you remember back, it started off with prayer in the morning. You know, we used to start VTN with prayer in the morning when we first started, from different pastors around the community. And then in the evening at 6 o'clock, I think they only had one news. I think there was only one station when television came on in the early 50s, and that was Channel 7, I believe. And they would sign off at dark, but before they would have the local and national news, they would have the Venable Quartet. The Venable Quartet sponsored the news, and you'd have gospel singing, and then you'd have taps or, you know, some semblance of to end the day. And then they started staying on till midnight, and then, of course, it went from that to 24 hours. But the family programs back in the early 50s was Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, My Three Sons. I mean, these were wholesome family programs. And they were patterned after biblical principles until the Norman Lears and those type people started redefining the family, what the family was and what the family should be and how it was supposed to be like. And of course, the family changed because they were watching those programs and they thought, well, if that's the way the family's supposed to be, then that's what we'll do. That's just backwards. It says here that the father is to be the instructor. He's to give instructions to the family. But if there's no family model, what are kids going to do? They're going to find a mentor somewhere because that's what's programmed in them. They're going to be like who they see, and they're going to be like what they hear. So the family was always the crucible for producing a godly generation. And when all that went away, you see what happened. We started producing an ungodly generation. The father was a fool. The mother was irrelevant, you know. But that's not the way God designed it. That's the way secular humanists designed it. Let's go to the next part of that verse. Hear the instruction of your father, and forsake not the law of your mother. Now, we're not talking about the woman usurping the authority over the man, but or rejecting or rebelling or, you know, controlling the father. The mother set the law of grace. She set that into being. She made sure that the family was fed and clothed and looked their best. And my mother was a good example of that to our family, to my sister. And she was a good example of etiquette. She was a good example of moderation. And she set the law, the graces. She's the one that taught me how to respect women, how to pull out the chair for them to sit in, how to open the door. My mother did all that. My mother, taught the social graces. I love my mother. I'm looking forward to seeing her when I get to heaven because she taught me everything I knew about the family and the marriage. I never, ever saw my parents fight or argue. Never. Jeannie and I were talking about that the other night. And her father was the same way in her family. Her father's the one that took them to church in the beginning. She said, my father always took us to church. Mother stayed home and cooked Sunday dinner. My father always took us to church. Well, with us, with my family, my mother was always there to teach us what to do and what not to do. She would always tell me every Friday night when I'd go out to the high school ball game, she would tell me every Friday night, she said, now, Bubba, That's what she called me, Bubba. She said, now, Bubba, you know right from wrong. You know what's right, and you know what's wrong. Oh, my Lord. I got so tired of hearing that, because every time I wanted to do something I shouldn't do, I could hear her words. Now, Bubba, you know what's right from wrong. And I can hardly wait to see her. My mother was raised that way, so she raised us that way. My mother was a professional ballet dancer. She was performing with a ballet troupe, a company in New York City, performing Swan Lake, I think that's right, when World War II broke out. And then she and Daddy eloped and got married, and then he shipped out, that kind of thing. A lot of people did that. A lot of couples did that. Well, she was taught in the graces. She went to Christian college in Missouri, and I have a picture of her sitting out in front of the one of the gates, not the gates, the walls that surrounded the college. It was a short wall, but all the girls were the stairs in the wall, and they were having a class picture taken. And Mama was she was a classic picture of a mother that laid down the law. This is the way things go. And I never heard her or my dad fight or argue. If they did, they had the wisdom to not do it in front of the children. We never saw or heard them raise their voice to each other. They were never cruel or unkind together, certainly never struck each other. They never argued in front of my sister and I. So that's the mother laying down the law. This is the wisdom of God, the knowledge of God. Sadly, we don't have that today in our culture today. We don't have. The father is not the instructor. It might be some athlete or some entertainer. The mother is not the lawgiver. It might be some, again, some entertainer or whatever. And so these are the foundational principles of wisdom according to the Bible. Now, let's go over to Genesis 18. And I want you to see the wisdom of God. And I want you to see what judgment is. Judgment is misunderstood today in our culture. They don't understand judgment. Even in the church, we've had so much hellfire and brimstone damnation taught that people really don't know what judgment is. In Proverbs chapter 1, in Genesis 18, that's where we were. Genesis 18, I want you to listen to this. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him. There's the family again. And they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. I know Abraham. He's going to do what's right. He's going to keep justice and judgment. Say those two words out loud. Justice and judgment. Those are not bad words. Those are not negative words. Those are not sinful words. They're good words. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now, and I will see whether they've done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. Now here's God, and he is making what I call a judicial investigation. Say that word, say those words, judicial investigation. This is what God is doing. He said, I will go down now, and I will see. I will make a judicial investigation. Because the reports is that there was great sin in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And there were no righteous people to do righteous acts in these cities. So God said, I will go down now, and I will make a judicial investigation, and I will see whether this is true or not. And that will determine my judgment and my justice upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. What do you think God would find today? Sadly, he would, now keep in mind what Sodom and Gomorrah was. It was a sinful city. There was homosexuality. There was all kinds of moral sins, sexual sins, everything that's going on today. What do you think God would find if he came down today and took a look at what's going on? Just in America. Just not so much the whole world, but he would find the same thing. Jesus told his disciples, he said, now, in the end days, the days before the tribulation, the beginning of sorrows, he told his disciples, he said, you're going to see all the corruptible things, the sinful things. It's going to be just like it was in the days of Noah. Remember Noah? You know why God built the ark and called Noah to put his family, 8 members, and 2 of every kind of animal on the ark, because he was going to destroy the earth with a flood, kill everything and everybody. Why? He said, because I have seen in the heart of man wickedness. I have seen that man's heart is only evil continuously. And that's why he destroyed the earth. Destroyed the population of the world in the days of Noah. And Jesus said, in the days preceding the rapture, he said, that's exactly what you're going to see in the world. And we are. We're seeing that exact same thing. So God, what do you think God would do if he came down and he saw all the corruption, everything that we saw in the days of Noah, the immorality, the corruption? Well, God told Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm going to go down and make a judicial investigation. I'm going to see. Does God have the right to do that? Of course he does. Does God have the right to make a judicial investigation? Does God have the right to measure out, as he has seen here, justice and judgment? Yes, he does. And so he went to Abraham and he said, the cry of Sodom is very great. I'm going to go down and I'm going to see what they've done together according to the cry of it, which has come up to me. And the men turned their faces and went towards Sodom. But Abraham stood before the Lord. And Abraham drew near and said, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? So Abram stood in the gap. He stood as an intercessor over the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he challenged God and said, what if there are 50 righteous there? If you go down to verse 25, he says, be far from you after this manner to slay the righteous with the wicked. In other words, if there are 50 righteous there, would you spare the entire city for the righteous sake? That's the value of the intercessor, the go-between. And would you not slay the city killed if there are 50 righteous? And he said, that be far from you shall not the judge of all the earth do right. In other words, he knew that the city deserved judgment and justice according to the Word of God. And to go all the way through that 18th chapter, God said, no, if you can find 50 righteous, I won't destroy the place for 50. And it went all the way down to 10. In verse 32, he said, let not the Lord be angry, I'll speak but this once. Peradventure there be found there 10's sake. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. If there are 10 righteous, will you not hold off and spare the place for 10's sake? Yes. Now, here's what I want you to get out of this. A judicial investigation. Justice justice is required and judgment is required when there is sin. In the beginning, here in Sodom and Gomorrah, he judged that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were sinful, sinners. Did he have the right to levy that judgment? Yes. Did he have a right for justice? See, righteousness demands justice. You have the choice. You have the freedom of choice. You can choose righteousness or you can choose unrighteousness. You can choose sin or you can choose not to sin. So God says it's your choice. But if you make the choice, then you have to be prepared for the consequences of that choice. And I think that's probably something that this generation is not ready for. They've been told, but they haven't yet responded positively. We are responsible for the decisions that we make. That's only justice. That's not God punishing anybody. That's not God killing anybody. But we deserve the choice, and we deserve the judgment of the choices that we've made. You can apply that to any area. You can apply it to your family, your life, your personal being. If you measure out hatred and bitterness, you're going to receive the response. Galatians 3 says, don't be confused, don't be confounded. Man's going to reap what he sows. That applies to your character, that applies to your money, that applies to your politics, that applies to our government. Whatever we sow, we reap. So don't get mad at God. Don't say, well, God did this. No, we did this to ourselves. I'm hesitant. I was going to quote something that had to do with a politician, but I think I won't. They asked, well, I'll just skip over that because it doesn't resolve anything, and it only makes somebody mad. But we receive what we sow. What we do is what we get. That's the law of reciprocity. In Galatians chapter 6, it says, don't be confounded or offended. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Now, let me read you this about justice and judgment. I wanted to make sure that you understand that. I did a whole series on that one time, justice and judgment. Justice and judgment have to do with the fear of the Lord and the beginning of knowledge. The family is the crucible. It's either man's ways or it's God's ways. God's ways are right. They are just. So you cannot blame God for what happens to you, your family, your business, your neighborhood, your country. You cannot blame God for what happens to your country if judgment comes on, just like the world. Abraham stood before God and said, will you spare the place for 50's sake? God's purpose is not destruction. I think a lot of preachers need to learn that. God's not out to destroy people. I didn't come to destroy. I didn't come. Jesus said, I came that you might have life. He said the devil came to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But you've got to know, and Romans 13 deals with this, talking about civil government. It says if you disobey the law, if you violate the law, you're going to be punished. One of the problems we have in the, quote, woke culture is the defunding of the police. And all of that was a tragedy, and now all of those that were involved, I think, are learning. They won't admit it, but they're learning that that was a mistake. To have law and order, you have to have law, and you have to have order. And that's what law enforcement does. It enforces the order. And if you choose to rebel, if you choose to disobey, then you receive the consequence of your actions. I don't know if this generation really understands that. I think they still see when they're caught or reprimanded or arrested that they resent it. They see as the government or the law encroaching upon their rights. There is no right to sin. There's no right to killing, stealing, and destroying. There's no right to robbing. That's not a constitutional right. And you suffer the consequences of who you put in office. You suffer the consequences of your own actions. And this is all part of wisdom. This is all part of making right decisions. Another thing my father drilled in me as a kid was he told me one time, he said, son, you've been taught what's right and wrong. You know what's right and wrong. If you choose to commit the wrong and you wind up in jail, don't call me. I thought that was so insensitive. I thought that was so unfeeling and hard. Wait a minute, if I wind up in jail, don't call you? He said, no, don't call me if you wind up in jail. Because if you wind up in jail, you're the one that's responsible for it because you did the wrong thing. Wow. Those words echoed over and over in my mind all my youthful life. If you wind up in jail, you get one phone call, and Daddy said, don't call me because you put yourself there. Justice and judgment go together, but they are equally correct. If you want to walk in the wisdom of God, if you want to walk skillfully in life, you have to walk in knowledge, and you have to walk in understanding. And you can only get that by spending time with God and spending time in His Word. I recommend the book of Proverbs, really. I believe that every high school student, and of course when I was in high school, you did read the Bible every day. But I believe every student in high school should have to Proverbs, the book of Proverbs ought to be required reading, and it should be taught to the young people, and you would be a blessing to them. Don't forget, Jesus is Lord over Arkansas. We keep confessing that. So that's our confession. And wherever you're watching in the world, too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on X at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.